too loud, and now we are live, which we are not yet, but we will be in just there. Now we are live. See, I get to tell, and I think Substack does a little magical clip. Actually, they do a magical clip to determine when it's live. And the live chat is up. We have people. There you are, Jennifer. Hello, hello. Welcome from Australia. Linda Tether has joined us. Mary, Boom, Jim, Soren, it's so lovely to see you all joining us. I'm Barbara Tien here with Projectkin and delighted to welcome my Stories 250 guest of the day. Anne Wendel joins me from Connecticut. All right, I'll let you explain that one. Virginia. This was a little bit of a West Coast problem in learning a little bit of geography as we tell our stories of the American. Where were your ancestors at the time of the American Revolution? Is the fundamental question I asked when we got started on all this. Welcome, Kyla, another one of my guests in this series. The idea is to really dive deeper and make it much more personal. And it is that personal perspective on our history that kind of got us into the joke about what state is where. Because from out here in California, what do I know? And
Connecticut is right next to Virginia.
And we're not talking about that anyway. We're here to talk about Rye, New York, among many other things. So, Anne, tell me your story about America, about Stories 250. What came to this, and what's the story you have to tell?
Well, when I was a child, my mother's parents lived with us. My grandfather was one of 9 children, and my grandmother was one of 11 children. So my mother had 40 cousins, and she visited every single one of them. That's how we spent our vacations when I was a kid. So my grandparents, my mother's parents, came from Nova Scotia. They immigrated to what they called the Boston States in the early 1900s, and they met there in Boston in a large expatriate community from Nova Scotia. So that's why I have 20 loyalist ancestors, and I hope to write about every single one. If I can, because my grandparents are from Nova Scotia, and so many of their ancestors were loyalists. I have 2 British soldiers who are not technically loyalists. One actually was German and one was Irish, but they both
that story.
They both worked for the British Army. I have one family I don't know where they came from. I have one family from the Carolinas with 2 soldiers, one family from Philadelphia, and the rest of the family are from New York, and 2 of them are soldiers. So my grandfather was from Shelburne, Nova Scotia, and Shelburne was the main destination for the loyalists from New York. They were going to go to Shelburne, and they were going to build a city there, and it was going to be the capital of Canada. It was going to be so great. Shelburne has one of the best harbors in the world. It's the deepest natural harbor. So they thought that was going to be fantastic. And they moved in 36,000 people in the space of about a year or 2. So for a while, it was the 5th largest city in North America after Boston, Philadelphia, New York, Charleston. It was huge. But the unfortunate thing about having, you can have a great harbor, but then you need to transport something. You can have ships coming in and out, but if they don't have anything to transport, it's pointless. So Shelburne was not near any good farmland like, say, New York City is. So there was no there were no crops to transport out or really any goods of any kind. So all these rich New Yorkers thought that they were going to go to Shelburne and it was going to be this wonderful city. And a lot of the other loyalists who went with them were city dwellers. They were um, one of my ancestors was a shoemaker, and another one was a saddler, and another one was a shopkeeper. So all those people are city dwellers. They need to have a population.
Right.
And if you don't have a population, you don't have anybody to sell to, then there's nothing for you. So the people who went to Shelburne, they didn't realize this. And so when they got there, the logistics of handing out land grants to 36,000 people got really messed up. And the people who knew, who had connections or who could bribe people, got the first land grants or the best land grants. And then it kind of trickled down from there. So after a year or so, people realized that the land was terrible. It was rocky. It was not fertile whatsoever. So they started leaving. They either sold their land grants or they just gave up and left. So the population dwindled. The Revolutionary War ended. The treaty was signed in 1783. So that is the year that all of the British forces in what was the new United States left. On one day, they all left. On the last day, they all left New York City. It's called Evacuation Day. They had brought all the troops and all the loyalists from all the colonies, and they brought them all to New York City and gathered them all there. And then they evacuated from there on fleets of ships, mostly to Canada. So large population went to Shelburne, and then the population just started dwindling and dwindling and dwindling, until it was basically a ghost town because they had laid out the streets nicely. They were all on a grid, and they had built these beautiful houses, and then the people abandoned it, and there was grass growing in the streets, and there were wild pigs living in the houses. And so my grandfather was born outside Shelburne in 1888, so about 100 years after the Loyalists arrived. So if you were born there, you know that your ancestors have been there for 100 years because
Yeah.
nobody moved in to Shelburne. Everybody just moved out. So when we talk about our 16s, all of my grandfather's 16s were loyalists.
Mhm.
He just didn't know that. If you're there in Shelburne now and your family is probably from there, then you can bet that pretty much all your ancestors were loyalists.
Mm.
So as I said, my mother visited all of her cousins, and we had several cousins in Shelburne. About half my grandfather's 9 brothers and sisters went to Boston. The other half stayed in Nova Scotia. So we would visit there regularly. And Shelburne now has a tourist economy that they base on being founded by the Loyalists. And so
Mhm.
when I was 8, I said to my mother's cousin, looking at all the signs everywhere, are we Loyalists? And she said, I don't know. So I said to myself at 8 years old, when I'm old enough, I'm going to find out. And when I was 14, I did a whole bunch of research and I found out. So I would visit my mother's
I
cousins.
just want to pause. I just want to pause for a moment to enjoy that visual of little 14-year-old having waited these 5 years
Mhm.
to go be that scholar and go
Yep,
research who are my people. Oh,
I did.
okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that.
Did. We went, Shelburne County has the archives right there, and they have a ton of information. People help you. I looked it up. We went to the provincial archives, and of course, I went with, of course, my mother brought me. I was only 14, and we went in there, and I was immediately crushed because they said that I had to be 16 to get in. So, and I was very shy. It's the other part of this. So I was just dumbstruck, and I'm just standing there with my mouth closed, and my mother's trying to talk me in, and she's like, "Well, it's her project.
Time for a
It's
fake ID.
right, right, right." She's she's not just tagging along because I have nothing else to do with her. It's her project. And so the lady said, "Oh, is it a school project?" And I was like, no,
No. That's the right answer.
just want to know my family tree."
It's personal. Yeah, come on.
And at that time, the only people looking for their family trees were like over 80 years old. So it was very, very strange. But yes, so the lady did let me in. Um, but
Cheer
so
for librarians
I,
everywhere. Thank you,
yeah,
thank you, thank you.
I would say I snuck into the archives underage. But we would visit my
Scarred
cousin's
for
house,
life.
and my cousins lived in a 200-year-old house. It was built by Captain Joseph Durfee, who was a loyalist. He was one of the rich people who came to Shelburne and built himself this grand house overlooking the harbor. And it was so well built that when we were there 200 years later, it was still standing. Um, my cousins had never installed any kind of plumbing. So that was just fascinating to me as a kid because we got to pull water from the well, which was not close to the house, hand over hand. Then we would come in, pour it into the buckets that they had lined up by the door, by the dry sink, and they would heat everything on the wood stove. And then they would pour water into the kettle in order to wash dishes. You had a basin, a metal basin. What was fascinating to me was that you could wash dishes anywhere, on the kitchen table, in the pantry, anywhere. You would heat your water in the kettle, pour it in, and then the soap was somehow, and then you could wash the dishes. They had a pantry, which was also fascinating because no modern houses had pantries. They had shelves for their dishes. They did not have cabinets that opened and closed. That was fascinating. In my bedroom, I had a china pitcher and bowl, and so I could wash in my own bedroom. And then we brushed our teeth outside on the lawn with a cup, and then we could spit our toothpaste on the lawn. It was just so much fun, so much fun. And of course, we had an outhouse, which was way, way far away. And that was hilarious. I mean, it stunk really, really bad, and that's what made it fun.
Yes.
So, and the house was in two parts. The old part was from 1783 or 84, and the new part, I've since learned, was from 1830. That's
A-
about
And the house is still standing.
no, no,
Oh,
it
no.
crushed me, crushed me. But
Oh, no.
the old kitchen was a fireplace that I had seen like in historical houses. And it was just this big fireplace with a built-in oven in the wall and all that. And then they gave that up when they put on the addition, and then they had a wood stove in the new part of the house. So that was just, completely fascinating to me. But my cousin's family was like, well, Shelburne was a tourist town, and they were always trying to get them to let people in or tour it or make a historical site. And they were always like, nope, this is our house. Don't bother me. We live here. We'll do whatever we want. Stay away. And by the time they got to be elderly and they needed help with the house, well, they pretty much let the house just kind of fall down around itself. And my cousin just gave up and built herself a kit home on the property and moved into the kit home and just let the house continue to fall down. By the time they actually wanted to do something with it, the historical society was, I don't know, they dropped the ball. And then they decided in the end that it was a fire hazard. So they tore it down, which just completely makes me sick. Um, but
Here
but
we are, remembering history. Exactly. Go on. Go on.
but about 10 years ago, I was driving through. I had gone back on a visit where I hadn't been in decades, and I was like, "Oh, let's drive by and look." And there was a for sale sign on the property. So I bought the property because I thought this is just too good to be true. This for sale sign. It was our last day in Nova Scotia. We were trying to make a ferry. We drove by. There was a for sale sign. I was like, "This is a sign. I
That's the
need to go look at this
post.
house."
Yeah.
Um, the real estate agent was like, "Can't show you the house because I don't have 24 hours notice." I said, "I don't need to see the house." This is the kit home we're talking about.
Yeah.
I don't need to see the house because I know what it looks like. I just wanna know the particulars, the property has been divided up among family members. How big is it? What is the price? Do you have a survey? That kind of thing. So, and I thought, this is crazy. I thought I went home and I was like, "Okay, I'll think about it. And if I still think I'm crazy in a month, then whatever." So anyway, I went home for a month. I bought it. I live in Virginia. The house is in Nova Scotia. I bought it. I rented it out, um, until I got ready to move there. So it's been 10 years that the kid home has been rented out, and I retired last year, so I decided it was time to go and fix it up and make it into, an Airbnb so I have somebody to look after it over
Yeah.
the course of the year, but I could still go visit.
Yeah.
So, we went there last year. The kid home needed much more work than we thought. So, we were actually there from June to November working on it.
Wow.
And in the process, um, it's so, so cool. In the process, it has been overgrown, and in just mowing and mowing and mowing, the footprint of the house is there. And so we kind of dug up the outside of the walls. Um, I have a million pictures of the outside of the house because when we would visit, we appreciated the historicalness of it. So we were always taking pictures. So I have multiple pictures of all around the outside of the house. There was no flash photography, so there's only maybe like 5 pictures of the inside.
Mhm.
But I have I've kind of excavated without trying not to touch anything, like, by hand, just the outside footprint, and I've put up little wooden signs. They're cute little wooden houses, and on them, they say, like, kitchen, front
Uh-huh.
door,
Uh-huh.
porch, like that, and I put them all around so people can look at that, and what I'm hoping to do next year is talk to the people in the historical society and see what kind of information they have on the inside of the house.
You
Um,
could take not to be I can't help myself. You could link from this, this was the kitchen, and then you've got the photos of where the kitchen was.
mhm.
You could link just a simple web page that links those 2, so there's a URL that is a location that you could put on a QR code that sits at that post, so at least for your Airbnb guests would add value to the visit, to you're visiting a historical location, and they can see the original property, and then you can just keep adding um, to that website with the stories as you add to it, whether that website is a Substack or that website is a web page that is integrated into the website, you just have that flexibility to keep on adding to it. And frankly, get what you're getting here. Do you see that audience? Look at this. You see, we're all signing up for the Airbnb.
Yes,
Um,
I'm writing down now that you told me that. That's a wonderful idea. I'm writing that down.
we'll do a call. I'll show you how it'll be. An
Great,
afternoon, it'll get done. And Jane Chapman,
great.
all the way from New Zealand. Thank
Oh,
you, New
great.
Zealand, Australia, Victoria, twice. I see you, Anne. I see you. So we have many of our contributors, and Jane Chapman, who just points out that we are.xyz as an archival tool is also a wonderful tool for a one-place studies. You see how I worked that in there? One-place
Mhm,
studies?
mhm.
That's what this is. Um, and it creates a way to just keep
It sure
adding and
is. I didn't
adding and
even think of that,
adding to
but
the
it is.
story of the
Wow.
place. And this is a chance for me to just sort of casually insert in here, not to
Mhm.
insult, the All About That Place series coming up in October. This isn't me. This is the Society for One Place Studies in combination with the Society for Genealogy in the UK and the British Association for One Place Study, or Local History, sorry. And they have an upcoming, well, and they have invited Projectkin as a co-sponsor, I'll have you know. And this series is a 10-day series from October 7th to the 16th, with all of these series of programs supporting that. And I see that, Jane, and just dropped in the URL for doing a one place studies with weare.xyz. And the neat thing about that is you keep doing what you're doing, but you're also infecting others. Because at the end of the day,
Mhm,
that's what we're trying to do.
mhm.
We're trying to get other people to see what we see, the joy in this history, how the remarkable experience. In this case, it sounds to me as though the dissolving of the building is part of the story too. As sad
Mhm,
as it is
mhm.
from an architectural perspective, an elderly couple having to be kicked out of their home because somebody else wanted to do something with it would have been sad too. And this is it's all part of the story. That's just amazing. Now, we started all this from the was it 4 articles that you wrote for this the all the Stories 250 series.
I
And
think
one
it's
of
8.
those is it 8?
I think it's 8.
I don't think I did not link enough of them, but that's okay because we have a magazine coming in. You'll be able to see them all. Um, but you have a particularly interesting one that just came out recently. Did you want to talk to us about that one, your most recent one?
Sure. So the most recent one is my grandmother's family, which came from the opposite side of Nova Scotia, and that's the Rushton family, and they know that they know that they're from Westchester because they named their new community Westchester. So they know they came from Westchester County, New York, and they named it their new community Westchester. They call themselves the Westchester refugees. So
Mm,
my ancestors, John Rushton and his wife Mary Coon were the parents, and they went there with all, I think, 7 of their children. Most of the children were adults by then, so their 3 adult sons also got land grants. But my ancestor Jeremiah Rushton was a member of a fighting force called the Westchester Refugees. Um, and they were called cowboys. They were called cowboys because one of the main things that they did was steal cows. That was that w- that was okay, I forgot what I was about to say. But anyway, they were like they were like an irregular fighting force. They didn't get pay, they didn't get uniforms, they had to they had to supply their own supplies. So what they did basically was go around terrorizing the community and um, steal cows. So their commander, his name was James Delancey. The Delanceys were a very prominent loyalist family in New York. So they're often confused with other Delanceys. So I
Mhm.
have to make sure that my ancestor in my Delancey, his nickname was the Outlaw of the Bronx, and he was on the very top of Washington's wish list of people to be captured. They weren't ever captured. So my ancestor Jeremiah joined the Westchester refugees in March of 1781. And the thing about New York was that you had New York City, which is where the British occupied the city, and that was
Yeah.
their main base of operations. And then you had New England. So the county just north of New York City, which is Westchester County, was no man's land. In between further upstate New York and New England. And Washington had his camp on the opposite side of Westchester County. So in between in Westchester County, there were no laws. There was no government, and there was no law enforcement because it was the no man's land in between. So
Right.
everybody who lived there had their homes and farms and themselves attacked
Mhm.
by one
Mhm.
side or the other. They were just constantly um, kind of guerrilla warfare, attacking each
Mhm.
other. So a lot of people went to New York City, where it was safe.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know what my ancestors did. I have like 10 of them who were from New York, so I don't know if they left their homes in Rye or wherever and went into the city, or whether they stayed outside in Rye. All I know is that my my ancestor John Rushton was a saddler. He made saddles, and very few people were rich enough to own a horse. So he probably would have been selling it to New York City residents or to the British. Um, he he was in New York City so much that he voted there, and he served on a jury there,
Hmm.
even though he lived in Rye. So I found Rye is about, I guess, 20 miles from New York City.
Mm.
So I found out that New York City would allow you to vote if you just were there enough. You didn't have to really fulfill any kind of criteria to vote there. But in Rye, you had to be a landowner.
Mm.
So he didn't own land, and that's why he voted in New York City. But he also served on a jury there and did other things. Um, his son, my ancestor Jeremiah, was a cordwainer, which is a person who makes shoes from
Mm.
very fine leather. if,
Mm.
if you've heard the word cobbler, that is a shoemaker who patches shoes back together, who repairs shoes.
Oh.
Cordwainer comes from um, a city in Spain called
Sevilla?
Cordova or something
Oh,
like that.
Cordoba. Cordoba. Yeah.
Okay, and they have fine leather and
Yeah.
they make shoes, and that's where the leather came from, so that's where the
Mhm.
word. So whether they went into the city or not, I don't know, but you could get a land grant for obviously for serving in the army, but you could also get a land grant if you had done something for the British, if you had um, helped them in some way, if you had spied for them, if you had provided materials. And another way you could get a land grant is if you had signed one of several oaths of allegiance to the
Mm.
crown.
Mm.
Um, so at the end, New York had the most loyalists of any of the 13 colonies, and they were also the most punished at the end of the war. So if you were from another colony, you may not have been punished that badly, and you may have stayed. But the New Yorkers knew that they were going to lose everything they had. And
Mm,
so most of them chose to leave.
mm, mm. Very interesting. Wow. You know, one of the things that I have found so fascinating about the series is interweaving these different stories. And I'm generally, reading them one at a time as they were appearing, and then whoosh,
Mhm.
I'm reading more and forgetting the details of the others. I've had the privilege of putting these together both in the magazine and in these talks. I was just chatting with Diane about her family and her story about, I want to say, Ryerson. I'm not sure if I got that right, Diane. And it turns out I was completely wrong about being New York. It wasn't New York, it was New Jersey.
Close.
Thinking about, yeah, that's my point about my lack of geography. Um, the ways in which these patterns come up, I hadn't realized my own ancestors that I'd been looking at as, great American patriot, and his cousins were all loyalists. They were
Mhm.
in Massachusetts and in Boston, and basically they were wealthy merchants. So they
Mhm.
got the hell out of Dodge
Mhm.
early
Right.
because war is bad for business.
Right. Well, the
And
British took over Boston early,
mhm,
around the time before even Lexington and Concord. After the Tea Party, they took
yeah,
over. They took over Boston, so everybody had to get out.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my guys probably left at about that point, and to for what it's worth. I won't say to the credit, but one of them did go on, who went north, went to Canada, did in fact end up becoming a big shot in the war. The Orange Men, Orange Rangers, and then his brother, I guess, went on in naval operations. But I had no idea that we somehow in my family we never talked about the loyalists. But in retrospect, it just brings us such depth to the larger story, which at the end of the day is all we're really trying to do here.
Mhm.
I've just loved going through all of this, with all of you chiming in with your parts of these stories, and hope that as we, reach this American crescendo of a 250th anniversary, la di da, we will put it on a shelf? I hope not. I hope we continue to explore the history and the deeper meaning behind it, and all of us as family historians. I mean, I think we're in it. We're in it for the long run if you're here. And whether it's one place studies or these kinds of articles that we're all working on, I really look forward to these continuing conversations. Linda Tether chimes in from Calgary with what an interesting program, Anne. As a Western Canadian, I didn't know anything about Shelburne, Nova Scotia. I'm sorry, our Nova Scotia representative, Marcy, isn't here.
Oh,
She's often will be chiming in with these kinds of events, and I'm sure she'll pop in to watch the recording. This
well,
blending is just fascinating.
one thing that very few people know anything about, is the Black loyalists who came to Shelburne. So the the Blacks became loyalists with the Virginia Proclamation in 1775, which I, as a Virginian, knew nothing about, and my children growing up in Virginia, learning Virginia history, did not learn anything about. So when I found that out in my family's hometown of Shelburne, where they have the Black Loyalist Museum, he was like, "What are you talking about? You're from Virginia. You've never heard of the Virginia Proclamation?" It was made
Oh.
by the British Royal Governor of Virginia, and he said that any indentured servant or slave who could escape from their master and get to the British lines and who was able-bodied um, would could work for the British Army and would get their freedom.
Mhm,
So, and his intention was to get more able-bodied men to fight for him
mhm,
and also to reduce the fighting force on the Patriot side.
mhm,
So about 2,000 slaves ran away to the British governor alone in Virginia. It
Mhm.
only applied to Virginia, but
Mm.
it was printed all over the colonies. So
Mhm.
the slaves started escaping all over the colonies. At least
Mhm.
40 um, escaped from George Washington alone.
Mhm.
So then they had so many, and again, he was only looking for able-bodied men, but the men came with their wives and children. So they were
Mhm.
so many of them that in 1779, in Phillipsburg, New York, they issued the Phillipsburg Proclamation, which said that anyone, any slave who could escape, man, woman, or child, and make it to the British lines throughout the entire colonies, would get pay and provisions and clothing if they came to work for the British Army. Although you did have to work, you did have to be a slave of the rebels. If the loyalist slaves didn't get freed, but the rebel slaves did. Um, so,
Hmm.
hmm,
Is
hmm.
that gonna work out well? I wonder. Go on.
So, but in the end, it really it changed the politics because after the proclamation was issued, most slave owners supported the Patriots. And in fact, one of the lines in the Declaration of Independence says that King George was inciting the slaves to run away. So then
Yeah,
most
complicated history, yeah.
most loyalists were not slave owners. Most slave owners were patriots. So, so come to the end, there are about 80,000 to 100,000 slaves escaped to the British. It was the largest drop in slavery in
Mhm.
general until the
Mhm.
Civil.
Mm.
Um, so all of the people, all of the loyalists left wherever they were after the war was over. They all ended up in New York City, and therefore all the Black loyalists did also. They ended up in New York City, and therefore all of the slave owners who wanted to claim their former slaves also ended up in New York City. So it was a very scary time for all these escaped slaves who had been promised freedom and didn't know if they were going to get it or if their former slave owner was going to find them. And so they had signed the treaty, and the treaty said that all property was going to be returned to the American patriots. So George Washington met with the British general, Sir Guy Carleton. Guy Carleton was sent to America specifically to handle the surrender. So he met with Washington, and Washington said, I want all my property back. And Carleton said, yeah, that's fine. And Washington said, well, that includes the slaves. And Carleton said, well, they're not property, they're people. And they are, in fact, our employees. And they are, in fact, members of the British Army. So you're not getting them back. So they went back and forth in the negotiations. And so one of the things they did was a British general called General Birch wrote a certificate for every slave who worked for the British Army. And it said their name, if they had family members with them, their physical description, how long they had been working for the British Army, what it was that they did, their occupation, who their former master was, where they had escaped from. Not every record has everything, but there's an amazing amount of information.
Bureaucracy.
And
Bureaucracy. Ugh.
General bureaucracy. General Birch wrote it all down in what they call the Book of Negroes, and
Mhm.
he gave each one of them a certificate.
Mhm.
So it was, I can't imagine the trust that they put into General Birch or the British that they actually went on these ships and gave them all that information.
Yeah.
But they did, and in the end, after Washington and Carleton had spoken about 3 times, Washington gave up and went away without any slaves. And so, Sir Guy Carleton transported about between 3,000 and 3,500 Black loyalists to Nova Scotia. 1,521 of them came to Shelburne, and they made their own community, which they call Birchtown, after Samuel Birch. Um, Now, like I said, the land was very bad in Shelburne, and it was not what anybody had been promised. So the Black loyalists got the least of anybody. And the conditions were so poor that after
Mhm.
several years, some of the British abolitionist societies, um, they said maybe they would want to go back to Africa. And so they arranged transport for them to Sierra Leone, and 1,200 of them actually left Birchtown for Sierra Leone in 1792. And so Birchtown was left more or less abandoned, but that's when my ancestors bought their land and moved into Birchtown. And so Birchtown was an integrated community um,
Wow.
since 1783.
Wow. I don't know,
And
Jim
it
the
is.
historian, if you're still on, I think we need to
Mhm.
see some work from you here too.
Mhm.
That's
So
amazing.
it's known as the
That's
first Black community in Canada.
wow. Wow. Yeah, the story of James Armistead Lafayette. Are you familiar with that one?
No.
Um, he was, as I understand it, enslaved by the Armistead family, who bequeathed him his services to George Washington. No, sorry, to Lafayette in order to cultivate the fancy Frenchman's attentions because he was already at that point such a big shot. So they handed him over to do work. But by the time of the battle at Yorktown at 1781, Lafayette, who was very well known as an abolitionist, was befriended James Armistead to say, hey, I got a plan for you. And he sends him because the British didn't really know individuals like all you black people. So he could go back and forth across the lines and not be
Mhm.
detected. So he
Mhm.
was the perfect spy.
So,
So
mhm.
he goes into the rooms of power and listens in on what the plans
Yes.
are, and was a vital spy in the Battle of Yorktown. He's got a great
Mm.
scene in the Hamilton musical. This is the big finale of the
Mhm.
Battle of Yorktown. But that's the reference to that we did this because we had a spy. And yet, as Americans studying American history, we never hear this story.
Mm-mm.
It's a fantastic story, as are so many of these. We peel back from our own family history, and hearing about it like this is just breathtaking. And as Jennifer Jones chimes in, there are so many layers to your story, Anne. It's been great to listen to. And I think all of the
Thank you.
audience here will truly thank you for taking the time to do this. You do have the tone of an experienced teacher in retelling the stories. And I want to thank you so much, plus your generosity of contributions to our little Stories 250 collection, which, by the way, a little plug here. The door is open for contributions until June 30th, and our little magazine is going to get big. But, I think that's okay. We'll print more. It's fine.
It's
We,
been my
we
pleasure. It is so much fun. So much fun.
wonderful. It's
Mhm.
it's a way to, well, to share these stories to a larger audience. And that is, at the end of the day, really the idea: get these stories told. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I'll be posting this recording out in just a few minutes. And you all are welcome to make comments in the version, share with your friends, tell the stories. And yeah, keep on doing what you're doing. We truly appreciate this. See, they're all chiming in. There you are. Thank you,
Thank
thank you, thank
you.
you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
We have just one more of this series, by the way. Stay tuned for our June program. And all the details are in the calendar and the post I just did, you've heard enough from me. Thank you. Bye-bye now.